to Tipping Spheres with Hannah Becker. Today's conversation promises to be an insightful one. Whether you're joining us for the first time or you're a regular listener, we're so glad you're here. Our goal is to bring you closer to the innovative leaders and thinkers shaping our future. And today, we are thrilled to welcome Marcus Sachs, who is the Senior Vice President and Chief Engineer at the Center for Internet Security. Marc is a retired U.S. Army officer and was a White House appointee in the George W. Bush administration. His private sector experience includes senior leadership roles at SRI International, Verizon Communications, the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, and Pattern Computer. Prior to joining CIS, he was the Deputy Director for Research at Auburn University's McCrary Institute for Cyber and Critical Infrastructure Security. He holds a joint appointment with the Idaho National Laboratory and is a registered professional engineer. Marc lives in Huntsville, Alabama, also known as the Rocket City. Welcome to Tipping Spheres, Marc.
Thank you, Hannah. Good morning or good afternoon.
Oh, I'm so glad you're here and glad to talk to someone that knows where my neck of the woods is in near Tupelo, Mississippi.
That's right. It's beautiful down here. We call this God's country, right?
There you go. So, Marc, can you start off today with telling us where your story begins?
Yeah, so it's an interesting path that I've been on. That you read the bio there, and I am now, of course, at the Center for Internet Security. The CIS is about 25 years old, and I had the fortunate ability to be around on day one when it was dreamed up back in 2000. So at the time, I was retiring from the Army, or maybe about a year out. And never imagined I'd work for a company that I was there on the day we dreamed this thing up. It was a spinoff from the SANS Institute. But my story started long before that. So back in high school, back in the 70s, I'm obviously dating myself, but it had an interest in ham radio like a lot of kids. This is, pre-internet, 1970s. Techie kids today can go online, they can chat with friends around the world. Well, if you're into that, if you're a techno geek, nerd, whatever we want to call ourselves, ham radio is where it was at back in the 70s. And so at age 14, I got my novice radio license and began learning Morse code and, learning how to build things. Along the way, computers in the 70s were all mainframes, but our high school got connected to the ARPANET in the late 70s through the local universities. So that was my first exposure to other students, other kids that were out there. And I was blown away. It was so much fun. And when I got into college, I studied civil engineering. When I started, I was a freshman in 1977. Computers in those days, again, still mainframes, punch cards, all about Fortran, COBOL. We're connected, of course, but the ARPANET was not like today's internet in terms of speed. But I quickly figured out that I had this passion for computers, and I loved to program. And learning Fortran was super easy. And as students, for those of us who really understood it, we learned how to manipulate the professors so we could get more time on those mainframes. And so it wouldn't call it hacking. It'd be social engineering in today's terms, but we were already getting pretty good at it back then. So while I was in college is when we transitioned from punch cards and teletype machines into terminals like the old VT100, where you could sit at a keyboard like today, and on a screen, as you programmed, the letters would appear in front of you rather than being on a punch card and you didn't know if you had everything correct until you ran the program. On an interactive terminal, you could write some code, run it, see if it actually worked. And you didn't have to wait for a job to be done, a batch, to go through the computer processing, which could take an hour or more, depending on the grad students that were running it and whether they wanted to do your job or not. So anyway, coming out of college, joined the Army. I was on an ROTC scholarship. So you do 4 years, they pay for 4 years of college, you give them back 4 years. My first assignment was off to Germany. This is early 80s. And keep in mind, again, ham radio interest. I got over there and got my German ham radio equivalent license. And at the time, again, ARPANET was just started, but there was a growing interest in the ham radio community of connecting the Commodore 64 or the IBM PC. Those were all the rage in the early 80s. The Apple was just coming out. There's a whole bunch of competition in terms of computers, but how do we connect them together over the radios? And that was kind of fun because there was a lot of hobby interest in it, a lot of experimenting, true hacking, and this not in the sense of breaking stuff, but in the sense of trying to just make things work.
Mhm.
Write new code, try things out, see what works, what doesn't work, collaborate with your friends. We had bulletin boards, BBSs back then. So if you came up with something that worked, you throw it up on a BBS that you're dialed into. And we learned quickly how to connect up to the German phone network and bypass some of the things that the German phone companies didn't want us to do because we were Americans and that's what we did. And that's kind of how it all started. And so through the 80s, as I didn't leave the army, you didn't normally would do 4 years and then head off to the private sector. After 4 years, I was having too much fun. And you do another year and another year and another year. And after a while, 20 years are finished. And so through the 80s, a lot of the networking world really evolved. Ethernet, became popular. TCP IP became the dominant protocol. There were other competing network protocols in the 70s and 80s. So, for those who are historically minded, it's fun to go back and look at all the different ways we were trying to communicate. By the early 90s, TCP IP had emerged as the standard. But I had learned packet switching X25. That was another protocol that was popular. And so went back to Germany in the early 90s and was there right after the fall of the wall and got stationed in northern Bavaria. So we were able to witness this transition as West Germany and East Germany unified and became just Germany in the fall of 1990. And we also had the first Gulf War occurred at that time. And as you might remember, half of Germany got activated right after Christmas and went over to join forces that were already in theater. With my ham radio interest, we were running a Mars station, military affiliate radio service, MARS. And there in Germany, we had the ability, starting back that earlier in the summer, in August of 90, when the 82nd Airborne went over, we were able to run digital traffic. Again, this is August, September of 1990, out of Saudi Arabia through Germany back to Fort Bragg, a bunch of ham radio guys, and we're passing messages, essentially doing email, but we didn't use that word, but we're moving messages. And again, with kind of the hacker spirit, let's just make it work. Let's figure it out, and playing around with antennas and programs and got it to work. And shortly after that, when we came back to the United States, I got engaged in building networks. So Uncle Sam kind of knows more about their soldiers than the soldiers know about themselves. I was an engineer, moving dirt, bulldozers, construction, that kind of thing. And Uncle Sam said, "Hey, you seem to know a lot about this computer stuff. How about doing a year working in computer science?" And this is all of my fellow officers, Army officers, know about the functional areas. And so at the time, I got pushed into functional area 53, systems automation. I said, fine, I'll do that for a year. And talking to my assignments officer, worked out to go to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, from Germany. Now, my wife has got tears because she knows what Fort Bragg means. Meaning she'll never see me because you're constantly deployed. Well, I got to Fort Bragg summer of 93, and there was a big push, coming back from that first Gulf War. We wanted to bring computer networks onto the battlefield. We wanted to start using these new technologies. Now, keep in mind, this is over 30 years ago, and we're imagining what a future battlefield might look like in the 21st century. And we knew it was going to be computer dominated. The words AI didn't exist yet, but we were already thinking about how are we going to use computers to assist soldiers. Would there be an augmented reality kind of future? And again, early 90s, we're already thinking of what would be possible. And we're seeing all this now 30 plus years later, as the technologies have evolved. So I spent a year building networks, solving problems. We went into Haiti. We did some other deployments. And after that year was up, I said, hey, I'd like to do this for another year, and another year, and another year, and wound up never going back to the Corps of Engineers. Wound up staying in systems automation. And somewhere in that time frame, 95, 96 maybe, I started to bump into foreign adversaries who were breaking into our networks. And this was kind of interesting because this concept of computer war, cyber war, information warfare, I mean, this was really nerdy stuff. The Rand Corporation had written about it, MITRE had written about it, but none of us had ever really thought it would happen because we were seeing computers and computer networks as being a logistics thing. It's just kind of like moving information is like moving ammunition or moving fuel or moving equipment. It wasn't really thought of as a thing you would attack or that you would use as an attack mechanism. But we saw our adversaries doing that. And we're talking mid-90s. And some of us are stroking our shaved chins instead of our curly chins and saying, wow, you know what? This is interesting. And maybe we ought to start thinking about this. And others in the intelligence community were, no, you're not supposed to have those thoughts. These are not things you should worry about. You know, go back to being a soldier. Don't concern yourself with these matters. But of course, being naturally curious, many of us who were not part of the intelligence community and not part of, you know, the anointed ones who are allowed to think about these things, we began thinking about it anyway. And I was pretty vocal about this. The bulletin boards grew into email and list servers and all the other ways of communicating in the 90s. And there were several of us that were pretty vocal about what we should be thinking about and how we should be not only being defensive, but being offensive in terms of the computers and computer networks. And in early 1998, there was an attack on the Air Force that came out, but originally it looked like it was coming out of Iraq, coming from Baghdad. And it was at the same time that we were bombing Baghdad, just when we had the no-fly zones, the northern and southern no-fly zones. And it was a computer attack. And the natural reaction was, wow, we've got an attack on the United States Air Force coming from a foreign hostile adversary. We need to respond. Well, the FBI, the NSA, others were engaged, and a couple of days into this incident, they figured out it was two teenagers in California
Oh,
that were
wow.
acting like it was coming from Iraq. In other words, they were faking the system. Well, we came, you know, very close to responding to an incident from a foreign
Yeah.
country that was not being caused by that foreign country. This caused, as you imagine, a huge reaction in Washington as to the game has changed. You know, there's a lot more to this story. We could go on for hours talking about it. There's been some YouTube videos and some books written about what's called the solar sunrise incident. So I would encourage your listeners to go look that up. It's a fascinating story from 25 plus years ago. I was brought in as I was an Army major at the time as a an analyst to think about it from an operational perspective. We had the J3 section that I was in, and quickly kind of took on the role as a pseudo technical director, you know, helping put together new systems, new way of thinking, how to segregate our own networks, how to defend ourselves, because we knew we would also be a target as we became better known. Along with fighting these foreign threats, Y2K was an issue. So again, you know, we stood up at the end of 98. So all of 99, we're sort of concerned about, will the hackers and will the nation states take advantage of Y2K to cause chaos? And very engaged there. And then got into 2000. Obviously, Y2K was not that big of a deal, but we learned a lot. But early 2000 is when we began to see a lot of the worm malware kind of thing really take off. This was the I love you bug, if you remember that one that floated around. A year later, there was code red and code green. There was all this new types of malware. Melissa was another virus, and it's all happening before September 11th, before the terrorist attacks. So we were very actively engaged in terms of sending out information to defense units around the world, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, about how to defend your networks. Now, along the way, there's another group that I was not part of that was examining the offensive side of this. That was all up at Fort Meade, obviously locked up behind the green door because they were still paranoid in those days of the offensive use of cyberspace. But we, the defenders, were very closely learning about the criminals, the hackers, their mindset, you know, studying them as an adversary. And we even discovered after a while the American hackers wanted to hack on behalf of the Defense Department, which put us in a really interesting predicament. You know, how do you say, okay, as long as it's patriotic hacking, but we're not going to give you a letter of marque. You're not going to be like a pirate that's been anointed by the queen to go forth and act on behalf of the crown. That's just not, you know, we can't do that. But on the other hand, if you want to go whack away on some foreign country, well, that's between you and that other country as to, you know, what comes of it. So it's an interesting time. A lot of the legal stuff that's in place today did not exist in those days. And so some of us of you know, fellow partners that went through all this, we think of it as almost a barnstorming era. for cybersecurity, where we're inventing TTPs, tools, tactics, procedures, technologies. We're the lawyers were inventing laws, policymakers are inventing policies, because we really had not been down this road. So early 2000s were an interesting time. The morning of September 11th, I was, very close to the Pentagon when that airplane hit the Pentagon, watched, on TV what was happening up in New York. We were very aware of Al Qaeda and other terrorist groups, and we thought that in the age of cyber warfare, that any future terrorist attacks would be attacks on infrastructure, power grids, oil, hospitals. We, the cyber world, did not anticipate a physical attack on our country. And so, we had to reorient our thinking a little bit, but it became really clear that, that they were using old school techniques, the physical attacks, but there was nothing to stop them from moving forward with cyber style attacks. So we spent a lot of time into 2021 and into the 2022 time frame trying to figure out what would the terrorists do if it was a cyber attack. And we found some very unnerving information, particularly as different terrorist groups were uncovered by the special forces teams. We're finding evidence that they had done electronic reconnaissance, that they had already broken into networks, they had downloaded things, they didn't do any attacks in that method. Well, end of 2021, I retired. It was done. My 20 years were up. I came in the Army back in 1981. I was going to head off to the private sector, and because of September 11th, I'd worked real closely with the White House staff. Got a phone call from the National Security Council. Hey, you want to come join us? And it's like, well, there's a bolt out of the blue. And hard choice. Do I go work at the White House, or do I run off to a defense contractor? So you can tell which one I took, so I wound up retiring on a Friday, had the weekend off, signed in on a Monday to the White House as an appointee in the George Bush administration, and what we call a Schedule C employee. So I was not a detailee from a federal agency, but a civilian brought into as part of the staff. So we had a small group there under Richard Clark, and putting together a national strategy to secure cyberspace, how we're going to protect our nation against this growing threat. That was in conjunction with other staffs working on counter chemical, all the things we thought that the terrorists might do. We had White House staffs kind of working on that and thinking about what should happen. So I had never worked at that level, had no idea about how the politics inside the White House works. So it was a very interesting time. We launched Homeland Security, got that up and running. The three of us broke out and became the first three at DHS doing the cyber mission. And that little group today is CISA. Grew up. So it's been kind of fun. I was there when we created a little group of people that grew up to become Cyber Command. And then when we launched DSS, it was three of us that grew up to become CISA today. So it's been kind of fun to be on this journey. And then after that, I've been in the corporate world. So, left the government and spent a lot of years at Verizon and NERC and places that as you read off on the bio there. So, but I've had a real strong connection with the federal government, continue to do things with Department of Energy and DHS and others. It's all the give back, and that's where I am now at CIS. Is I'm working not only with the federal government, but a lot with the state, local, tribal, territorial, the SLTT community, in terms of building cyber resilience in hometowns, city governments, county governments, municipal water systems, things along those lines. And I think it's an area, it's what we call the cyber underserved here at CIS. We spend a lot of time in Washington looking at big strategic national issues, which of course we need to, but oftentimes we miss the at-home crowd, those that are a lot more local to our citizens, those that provide the services that we all have to live by. They're all just as internet connected as the big systems, and they're very vulnerable. We don't have workforces. If you look across America, the tens of thousands of small to medium-sized cities, trying to attract and retain an educated and trained cyber workforce is very hard. Particularly when the pay increases. If the sounds you hear coming from Microsoft and Google and Facebook and thousands of other internet companies compared to, I'm going to go get a job at the local water supply, the local water district. That there are kids who will do that because they want to stay local, they want to serve their communities, and that is awesome. but I also get it where there's kids coming out of high school, college that they want to work for the big companies. And so it's a challenge that we face. And I think that's an area I would encourage many of your listeners that if they really, really, really want to do something that's fun and very rewarding, is look local and see what you can do at a local level, to help, particularly with your municipal utilities and others that provide these kind of services, but don't have the skills and the talent to do that. So there we go. How's that for taking a 10 or 2 minute intro and turning it into 25 minutes? But I think it kind of sets the baseline, for anything else we'd like to talk about today.
Yeah, it really does, Mark. It was fascinating to hear kind of how, your front lines journey with, what became Cybercom, what became CISA, and then kind of hearing your story, it kind of seems very, the themes of, supporting the cyber underserved, providing solutions to big problems, exploring things, and kind of coming up with something that works. It makes a lot of sense. So I appreciate the backstory. It's very enlightening.
Yep. And it's been an interesting journey.
Yeah.
I encourage others, do the same sort of thing, to diversify yourself, try different things out. But also, if you commit to something, commit to it for a few years. I've got too many peers, they jump around, they'll do something for 6 or 8 months and they want another challenge. Okay, I get it, but this is the kind of career field where you really do need to sink your teeth into it for 2 or 3 years at least before changing employers. Now, while you're at that employer, you may want to try some different things, fair enough. But I do encourage people to think a little more long-term, so that you can learn and you can help and you can plow back what you've learned into that organization or into who you're working with.
Yeah, the kind of investment, committing to investing where you're at, with what you're working in can make a world of difference.
It sure can.
I think all too often people just, especially in tech, it's like, oh, a bigger salary here, a better city here, and it's just kind of like
Well,
this.
I understand it. I mean, we all need to feed our families. We all want to be upwardly mobile, and in the computer security world, the salaries are somewhat embarrassing, as to how much we're commanding.
Yeah.
But as I tell lots of people, don't chase the dollars, chase the passion. Do things you want to do. You'll be rewarded. You'll be financially taken care of. But if all you're doing is chasing dollars, you'll be nothing but frustrated. And it impacts your health, your mental well-being. It impacts your ability to be social with others. So, but each of us have to make up our own mind as to what you're chasing, what's important to you.
That's great advice. So, Mark, what are new developments around cyber that you're excited about? I feel like in technology, the attacks, the vulnerabilities tend to dominate the conversation. And I was just curious, kind of with you've seen technology through so many, phases of development. Is there a specific topic or development that you're just really excited about in terms of cyber?
Absolutely. And it's not AI, which
Yay!
for those of us that have been to any recent conference, including
Yes.
RSA conference and many, and upcoming this summer, Black Hat and others, AI is the dominant thing that's out there, which is fine. I get it. That's where technology is moving. As I mentioned earlier, we were thinking about this back in the 90s, even back in the 80s, as to how are we going to augment for soldiers? How are we going to use what today we call AI? Back then it was machine learning. There were other terms for it. But no, what excites me today is a project I've been working on with Idaho Labs for the last few years. We call it cyber informed engineering. And so the concept here, and this, if you remember when I said earlier, my undergrad is in civil engineering, and I worked as an engineer for the first 12 years of my Army career before moving over to more of a cyber focus. So in my mind, I'm still thinking like an engineer, and everything is logical, everything's orderly, it's physics driven. So if I'm going to run a power grid, if I want to run an airline, it's all bound by the laws of physics. What's interesting is cyberspace and computer networks, other than at the electrical level, they're not bound by the laws of physics. We can measure things in the physics world. I can measure the length of something. I can measure stress. I can, if I want to bend something, I know how far I can bend it before it breaks. We don't have that in cyber. at all. And somebody says they're more secure than somebody, I'll say, well, what do you mean by that? How do you measure security? Does it mean you've applied all your patches? Is that your measurement? Does it mean that you've turned off all your unneeded services? Is that your measurement? But in the engineering world, we need precision. We need and a lot of times engineers, they're signing off on things. They're putting their own livelihood at risk. They become liable. And if you introduce to them, but you now need to be liable for it being cyber secure, engineers will push back and say, no, I can't do that. There's too much uncertainty. I can't do that. So an initiative that's developed over the past few years is, okay, how do we take an engineer that looks at risk and tries to engineer a solution around it to make it less risky, can consider cyberspace, cyber, whatever we want to call it, as a new area of risk, similar to, say, the environment, weather or rust or all these other kind of risks that we might be thinking about. So a civil engineer designing a building understands wind load. The wind's going to blow on the side of it, and I have to engineer that building to resist the wind load. But that engineer does not need to be a meteorologist, does not need to understand how the weather works, doesn't need to be a weather forecaster, doesn't need to get into all the intricate models of the weather. They just need to know when the wind blows hard, the building needs to stand up. Very simple principle, right? So in cyberspace, if I start introducing new digital equipment into what previously had been non-digitized, I'm introducing risk. It's a new problem that's coming in. It's a new thing that can't be quantified. And so as an engineer, a cyber-informed engineer, I want to start thinking about what controls, what mechanisms, what can I build into this system, this critical infrastructure that will make it resilient to the new risks introduced by digital technologies. I'm not going to make a cybersecurity expert out of them any more than I'm going to make a meteorologist out of them. I'm going to make a computer scientist out of them. So I'm going to take a mechanical engineer, an electrical engineer, chemical engineer, civil engineer, your classic engineers, and teach them how to understand risks that digital systems can bring in. And then how do you use your engineering brain to come up with a solution? So one of the probably the easiest model to understand would be a water pump station. Every town has at least one, if not dozens of these, that will keeps the pressure inside the water line. So when you turn on the faucet, the water comes out at a nice strong level, doesn't just dribble out. Those are pumps, valves, tanks, storage tanks, all hooked together. In an earlier era, they're all mechanical. And the engineer would show up and they would adjust the valve. They'd read a little meter, make sure it's however many pounds per square inch of water pressure, all as well. Many years ago, computer control started introduced. That's fine. I can set the computer. I want it to be at 10 pounds per square inch, 50 pounds per square, whatever. And the computer would then adjust the valves. But all that was done locally. Then a few years ago, some smart person said, let's network all that. And let's connect it all up to a network. So I don't have to drive to the pump station and tell the computer what to do. I can sit back in my air conditioned office and tell the computer what to do. Oh, okay, that's fine, because they were connected over phone wires and that kind of a network. Well, then somebody else comes along the last few years. Well, let's connect it up to the internet, so I don't have to even rely on the phone system, or I can, and I can, control this thing from miles and miles and miles away over my phone, a phone app. Brilliant idea. And the engineers are like scratching their heads. This just isn't right. And if you think about it, from a cost savings, economically, okay, it all makes sense. And even if the way you're doing it is absolutely cyber secure, you've done all the right things in terms of SOC 3 compliance and this checklist and this, that, and okay, all that's done. But there's always the uncertainty of some adversary getting into the system. And what's the worst thing they can do? Some people will say the worst they can do is turn the water off. Well, true, but a tree falling on the pump station would also turn off the water. So we know how to handle that. It turns out with water, the worst you could do is turn it on, turn it off, turn it on, turn it off, turn it on, turn it off at a rate that resonates with the pipes. So you're probably familiar with what's called a water hammer.
Yeah.
In an older house, if you turn the water off real fast, you can hear the pipes creak.
Yeah.
So what's happening when you turn it off, it creates a pressure wave that goes backwards through the pipe. And if the pipes aren't tightly screwed into the walls, they'll actually jump, and you can hear that pressure wave. Well, if you can turn it on, turn it off, turn it on, turn it off in a way that those pressure waves are resonating with the way the structure is built, you can actually cause physical damage. You can cause the pipes to come off the wall. I mean, literally a mechanical damage. That's the worst case. Okay, engineer, how do we mitigate? Without turning off the computer systems, without disconnecting from the internet, the engineer would look at that and say, oh, well, let me put a time relay in there that if I turn something off, it can't be turned back on again until at least a minute goes by. Or if it's on, it can't be turned off. So I get out of that resonant thing. That's a cyber informed engineer that says the new risk from all this computer stuff, particularly if it's internet connected, that the worst that could happen to me is physical damage. And there are other ways you can physically damage it, but just confining for this. That to me is exciting because now we can look at all these different critical infrastructures. Water is an easy one, but there's many more that are out there, and say, okay, as an engineer, are there ways I can, using my knowledge of physics and materials and other things, can I build in safeguards so if the cyber side gets compromised, an adversary gets into it, the worst they can do is an accident that I can contain and I can control, no different than if a tree fell on it or a car drove through a wall or some of these other unavoidable, unpredictable accidents, but I have ways of containing it. That is really cool. That excites me. AI, yeah, okay, that's coming, that's going. We'll have autonomous systems next. There'll be more technologies, but thinking about how to use engineering to help mitigate this. And I would argue that the same mindset could be thought of in the medical world, in the legal world. You get away from engineers to get into other practitioners. Are there ways we can use their skills to mitigate cyber threats coming from a world that doesn't follow the laws of physics? It's very unpredictable and can allow for humans to get in and cause malice, but yet I can engineer, or whatever the right term, safeguards around it to where if it fails in a controlled manner and it doesn't kill anybody. And then I can regain control pretty quickly. So if you see where I'm going with that, and you can tell from my voice here, this is a really cool area and I love exploring it. And it's been a lot of fun over the past 5 years working with Idaho Labs and with others, thinking about how we do this. We've worked now with a number of colleges and universities, engineering schools, see how we can integrate that thinking. It's not going to be a degree program, it's or nothing like that. It's let's just integrate that thinking in. No different than integrating in environmental safety or other types of things that we've talked about over the years that engineers are learning about. We're looking at working with existing infrastructure owners. It's not necessarily retrofitting, but it's take a relook at your current infrastructure. And if you're using computer systems, what's the worst that can happen? Focus on the consequence of a computer attack versus how the computer attack unfolded. That's a cyber engineer's problem to worry about, or a computer scientist engineer. Your problem as a regular engineer is managing the consequence of a cyber attack and then mitigating that, or even being able to prevent it. So if the cyber system gets fully compromised, there is not a consequence that's harmful or could kill somebody. Sorry, rather long-winded, but you can see, you asked the question, what am I most excited about? That's what I'm excited about.
Fascinating, Mark. And I love, as you're talking, I was just thinking about kind of how this is such a critical component in cyber workforce development that goes beyond just getting people graduated with computer science degrees, right? This is equipping and informing multiple different types of professionals to.
That's exactly correct. Which if you're listening to this and you're thinking about a future career, cybersecurity is an exciting career, yes. But I would say if you've got a technical mind and you really like math and the things that goes around that, go get an engineering degree. Continue down that road, do a minor in cybersecurity, but get a strong degree in engineering of whatever flavor you're interested in. And you'll be absolutely rewarded in your career in terms of what you're doing. Or if you want to be a lawyer, fine, minor in cybersecurity law, because you're going to need that as a lawyer. Or if you want to be a doctor, There is medical cyber, get smart on that. And so that, and of course AI, which is the next big wave that's coming along. I advise students, go ahead and start taking those courses. You don't need to major in it,
Yeah.
but increase your awareness of it and make it apply to your passion, your career field, wherever it is you want to go in life. And we keep talking about college. Many of your listeners may not want a college degree, and I think that is perfectly fine. Our job market needs people that are not necessarily college degree. They need passionate people, those who are willing to learn, roll their sleeves up, get things done. And if that means a high school diploma and get started, go for it. If it means a 2-year associates at a community college or technical school, go for it. If it requires 12 years of education and a PhD, God bless you, but go for it. Whatever it takes, but don't feel that, that there's a generic path to be successful in today's career field.
Such wonderful advice, Mark. I really appreciate you for sharing your insights and experiences today. Your contributions to our nation have impacted so many in so many different ways. So it's been fascinating to talk to you about your journey and kind of hear where you started and where you are today and all the ways you're driving innovation in cyber currently.
Well, thank you, Hannah. And I guess this is setting up maybe a part 2 or part 3 down the road, and we can explore, a lot more fun ideas to talk about in this area.
That would be great. That would be great. Well, I really, really appreciate you sharing your insights. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to this episode of Tipping Spears with Hannah Becker. We hope this conversation has sparked new ideas and challenged the way you think. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, and we'll catch you next time with another exciting guest.